You know it's autumn. How? My Wolverines laid yet another egg early on in South Bend. It is the Maximize Your Medicare podcast, September 6th, 2018. The seasons change. One thing doesn't. Today's podcast is still not financial advice. While I'm qualified to do so, I need to know a lot more about you in order to give you a specific recommendation. Be sure to go to the website for the book, MaximizeYourMedicare.com. There's a free newsletter, comes out every Saturday. A lot of information and tidbits in there. Some very interesting stuff about changes, a lot more in depth than can be sit here in a short podcast. Things that can affect not only you, and for me, the most important part of the podcast and most important part of the newsletter is for you to share it with someone you know. One of the problems we have is that your neighbor, your brother, your mother, your cousin, your friend, they don't know what they're supposed to. That leaves them with a problem and with the system as a problem. I'm off the soapbox. I'll tell you what I've been up to in this long hiatus. We'll start that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I started a charity. It's called the Great Humanity Healthcare Foundation. You can see it online, greathumanityhf.org. Basically, the bottom line is that you can hear by my podcast, etc., book, whatever, newsletter, all that kind of good stuff. I'm trying to make sure that people understand, trying to demystify the rules of the way that financial contracts actually work. However, sometimes that is just not enough. And all you need to do is think of the simple scenario, young family, $10,000 deductible. We don't need to go and this does not have to be specific to any location. This problem does transcend our fragmented political views, our fragmented blank views. Just put a blank there. This problem crosses all of them. On that, we can pretty much all agree. So the Great Humanity Healthcare Foundation will be making payments in order to help those persons deal with their medical debt. Those of you who have seen me in public, those of you who've read what I've written, those of you who've listened to my podcast, you can understand my perspective here. I'm not interested, I'm not playing our favorite national pastime, which is find someone else to blame. Let's just leave it as this transcends everybody. That we don't have easy solutions. We don't have a silver bullet. We certainly don't have a political solution. Even if we had a political solution, we don't necessarily have a fiscal solution. Meanwhile, the bills roll in. They don't stop. On greathumanityhf.org, a lot of very interesting deals. You can save money and contributions go to the foundation itself. Amazon Smile, iGive.com, National Public Relations Agents, self-publishing book, $200 if you bought a car in a particular location. Some very interesting stuff. You can shop online. A partial contribution can go to the Great Humanity Healthcare Foundation. Go there, check it out. Very slick 2-minute introductory video explains the motivation and what we're going to do. And I'd put it to you this way. It's so important to me that I even agreed to put my face for radio face and be part of a television interview. It's up there on YouTube under the Great Humanity Healthcare Foundation channel. We'll have more about that in future episodes, but now what we're going to talk about is 2019. I thought to give everyone a preview. There are going to be some very, very large changes which will affect those persons who are going to become Medicare eligible, or certain married couples, one where, let's just say, the wife is Medicare eligible, the husband is not yet, but will become Medicare eligible in the near future. All of a sudden, the decision making will become different. Let me back up a step. The reason for this is that 2019 means that you do not necessarily need to have health insurance. What this means is that you are not going to face a tax penalty if you do not have compliant health insurance. That's pretty important stuff. Why is that? That means that for those people who are very healthy, for those persons who don't have medical issues, it is entirely possible that a person can take a thinner health insurance plan for themselves. So let's just take the quick scenario. You're talking about a Medicare eligible person who is full-time working. Now, they may be fully covered by their employer if you work for a large employer, for example. And let's say that the cost is lower than Medicare. So it's entirely reasonable for the employee, the full-time working employee, to stay on the employer-provided plan. That doesn't mean that the spouse, the husband in this instance, who is not yet Medicare eligible, should also stay on the plan. Why is that? Cost. So some people say, well, it's not about the money. Well, yeah, it's always about the money. So depending on the cost responsibilities, premiums, that the spouse has to pay in order to keep the health insurance, that can drive a totally different set of decisions, which are detailed in Maximize Your Medicare, because I've been making this point, which is that, let's just say at a small employer, you've got the wife who's a full-time employee and the employer has paid for a large proportion of the premium, but doesn't pay for the husband. In other words, the family member, the spouse. In that instance, under the Affordable Care Act, I've been encouraging person at least take a look to understand whether or not the private market is better, cheaper, or whether or not you could get the tax credit. Well, in 2019, you have another alternative, which is the husband, in this instance, remember, not Medicare eligible and not well paid for by the wife's employer, can opt out and not face the tax penalty. In addition, what you see is an expansion of short-term health plans. These short-term health plans can now last for an entire calendar year. Now, you have additional thoughts, ones which may be entirely rational and economic. Now again, as I always state at the beginning of this podcast, always, not financial advice. I can't make this determination for you. I'm not here to tell you what is best to do. I'm not there. I don't see facts. That said, that doesn't mean that there are not alternative paths, other alternative ways to deal with the high cost of health insurance. The number of alternatives simply increased. For those people who are not anywhere close to Medicare, 2019 will have a bunch of new alternatives because of the fact that the individual mandate and the tax penalty for not having health insurance will disappear. You can remember what I just said a few moments ago, which is that short-term medical plans now can be extended for as long as a year. That does mean that the math of money, the practical reality, is that thin plans, these short-term medical plans, can be combined with critical illness plans to largely cover many of the catastrophic costs that can occur. For example, if you're diagnosed with cancer the easiest, most identical, most obvious one. So what ends up happening is your total premium will decline precipitously for a 54-year-old male, let's just say. Now all of a sudden, the short-term medical plan premium is much, much lower. And in addition to that, you can combine that with one of these critical illness plans, thereby your net bill far, far lower. That is especially the case for those persons who go to the doctor once a year for the checkup. Hi, doc. Is everything still good? Yes, no. And, have been going for years without prescriptions, medical costs. You can understand that those persons are frustrated because of the fact that they're paying all this premium and there's a reason for having insurance, but that doesn't mean that they're actually getting any benefits from the insurance other than the peace of mind, which is not zero, by the way. It is not zero. Anyway, that's where we stand for 2019. We are going to start having to have a lot more podcasts. 2019 promises to bring some very interesting changes. Well, interesting to me. Interesting to policyholders, because Medicare Advantage, it has been my view, which I've stated in every public forum as early, as often as I possibly could manage. Medicare Advantage is gaining market share, almost up to the 50% market penetration. What this has done is this has attracted more competition. It has not eliminated competition. It is that the sellers have seen this. They know it. They have known it. They are sharpening their pencils. And they are twisting the kaleidoscope, spinning the kaleidoscope, and the shapes and the forms of the visions that you see through the kaleidoscope are changing ever so subtly. But for some of you, that means that a change is going to be in order. And the reason is because the way that they're changing it may fit your personal cash flow situation, your financial situation, your health situation, which would dramatically change the result for you on a year-by-year basis. Now, I know that people don't like change. People always tell me that. And it actually makes my life, our professional lives over here, a lot more difficult, right? Because we get a lot more calls. Hey, can you figure out whether or not this plan continues to be the best plan next year? Yes, it's going to make it more challenging. I don't think there's any question about that. That all said, it's probably going to be worth it. And that has been my statement here on Maximize Your Medicare, which is the competitive pressure that the sellers face means that this benefits the buyer. We don't have to be talking about insurance. We could be talking about snowblowers on eBay. It is the same thing. More competition does make it more uncomfortable in the sense that people don't like change. They don't like uncertainty. But once you get used to it, well, ask Amazon what happens when people start getting used to shopping online. That's it for today. I'm Jay. Remember, MaximizeYourMedicare.com. Sign up for the free newsletter. No one's going to call you. No one's going to send you stuff. Not even me. I'm going to send you a newsletter. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Review it. Please give it 5 stars. I'm going to get back on this podcast train. There are a lot of podcasts, over 60 podcasts historically over the years. We're going to continue to go in these 20-minute snippets. I'm going to try to keep it limited. I don't like long-winded podcasts. Why? Because the topic is too complicated. It's too much to chew and swallow at one meal, at one sitting. Better to have a bunch of appetizers. Thank you for listening to the podcast today. We will talk with you next time. Oh, and by the way, if you are one of those persons that protest Nike and you have my size and they're unworn, you can feel free to send them to me. Pride is overrated.